I'm outside SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. It's where Manchester United played against Arsenal in the pre-season game. It's one of the most spectacular stadiums, if not the most spectacular stadiums in the world from an architectural point of view. It's been in the news more because Manchester United have been looking at this as being something which could potentially influence a future Old Trafford. Now, we don't know exactly what's going to happen with Old Trafford in the future, but the movement of direction is towards a new stadium, and I've got mixed feelings about that. I love Old Trafford, but my main feeling is that something needs to be done because Old Trafford has stood still for 20 years now and it's too small. It's showing its age a little bit. It's still a very good stadium, but investment is needed, be it redeveloping Old Trafford or a completely new stadium on the existing Old Trafford footprint. We're seeing headlines with numbers like 100,000 capacity, and I'll be honest, that excites me. 100,000 for Manchester United. United should have a 100,000 capacity stadium. Barcelona redeveloping and rebuilding for the most part Camp Nou, that's going to hold 105,000, and Real Madrid, who've probably got the best stadium in the world, that's going to hold 85,000. But it's not just all about capacity these days. Clearly, capacity is important. But this stadium behind me has a smaller capacity than Old Trafford for football games, or soccer games as they call them here. And yet it's miles bigger. There's loads more space. There's loads more facilities. The stadium's like 6 tiers in some parts. And it's just absolutely huge. I was blown away by it when I first went for that game against Arsenal. So what do you get? All right, the architecture's fantastic. Loads of leg room. Almost every seat has got a perfect view of the pitch. Some of them, the nosebleed seats, you're really high up. But then you're going to get that in any massive stadium. You get it on the top tiers at Wembley. In Barcelona, they've always been known as the nosebleed seats at the top tiers. They tend to be the cheapest tickets. And while I'm talking about cheap, we should mention price, because I can rave all day about how good this stadium is behind me, but the prices are off the scale. Ticket prices, well, NFL's expensive anyway, but even for the United Arsenal game, you were looking at least $120. And there's another thing, dynamic pricing. Ticket prices went up and down according to demand. All that sort of stuff leaves me in a cold sweat. And if you're just going to apply that to Manchester United, then I feel and worry that people will be priced out of going, because the Premier League now is so global that people can afford to come in and spend 200 or 300 for a one-off ticket. But what about your bedrock support? What about your season ticket holders? What about the people who, like me as a kid, went to every game through thick and thin, just didn't choose the big games to go to, went to every single game, home and away for most part of my life, and that continues now. But I appreciate that's not the norm. I appreciate that most people who call themselves Manchester United fans do not watch Manchester United in person. Premier League has become a massive global product, and the technology around that is improving. So just behind me over there, behind the stadium, is a thing called COSM, and I went in there before the United Arsenal game, and it's a massive screen. It's similar to the Sphere in Las Vegas, which is very high profile. And if United had something similar to the COSM at Old Trafford, then I see a situation where people could go and watch an away game, for example. You feel, you're not there, clearly you're not there, but you feel so close. You're just surrounded by the action. I watched a UFC fight on a screen there. And US stadiums have always been at the forefront of technology. I remember reading about how in the 70s, Giant Stadium in New York, New Jersey was just so much better than anything in Europe. And that doesn't exist. It's been rebuilt. These things have a shelf life of 30 to 40 to 50 years. Again, that makes me a bit uneasy, because some of my favourite stadiums are a lot older than that. If I think of the San Siro from the outside, I don't think there's a better stadium in the world from the outside. But ask Milan fans and they have a very different opinion, because the facilities on the inside are not great. Old Trafford needs to change. And on a previous video, I talked about the idea of a redevelopment, principally above the main stand. That's going to be extremely costly. I get that people have got very strong opinions on this. I do myself. I get that people have scattered the ashes of their loved ones on the Old Trafford pitch, and I'm just under the flight path of the LAX here, so it's pretty noisy. It's also a construction site as well, so excuse the wobbly camera at times. When you see something like this, and there are other stadiums like this, so United last year played in a brand new stadium in Las Vegas, and that was spectacular as well. It wasn't quite as big, and we've seen in Europe as well. We've seen in England the new Tottenham Stadium. It is spectacular. It's really good, but there's growing pains that come with that. Spurs fans are up in arms because their older fans are seeing some of their discounts taken away from them. And I think that if we get a new Old Trafford, and it's not just the stadium, it's the area around it as well. So where we are here is Inglewood, and Inglewood has not had the best reputation in Los Angeles over the years, but this stadium is acting as a catalyst for development around it, and it's gentrifying, and new infrastructure's been put in, new roads. There's a lake on the other side of the stadium, which is really nice. Stadium can act, and in this area there's not just this stadium, there's another one behind it, and then you've got the LA Forum, which is an established venue, which is just over on the other side. So stadium can be a force for good. How that is paid for is a different issue, because in the US public funds have long been used to pay for stadiums, and that would be very contentious in Manchester. But Old Trafford would only be part of a future development. That might include keeping the existing Old Trafford, that might be scaled down, for example. That might be used as a reserve team stadium, or a stadium for the women's team, or you might have a COSM thing built in. There might be some accommodation, because close to Old Trafford, going down to the wharf side, it's quite desirable. All around the other sides of the Manchester Ship Canal in the area, there's accommodation. Manchester needs houses, especially affordable houses, and there's a lot of space there. And for all the development, and I've seen that area change from being completely derelict in as late as the early 1990s, it's still very quiet at night. There's a new metro line being put in there. There's a very good road infrastructure in there, but clearly there is massive scope for development, with Old Trafford as the centre point of that. And I touched again on prices. When you come here, it's not just the ticket prices, it's everything around it. The car park where I am cost $100 to park your car for the Arsenal game. For NFL games, it's even more than that. The parking attendant told me it's $200. That sort of stuff scares me senseless, because football traditionally is a working class sport. I would hate to see Manchester United's core fan base eroded. Just nearly had a car crash in front of me, but I'm doing nothing wrong. And ticket prices, I think, will become more of an issue, because we've had a good run with ticket prices. I first got into fan politics in the early 90s, when ticket prices became really expensive at Old Trafford, and they jumped up 30% year after year. And then there was another big jump in 2005 when the Glazers took over. But since 2012, it's been pretty good. There's been concessions for kids, not just kids, because it used to be anything above 16 was you paid an adult. Now there are different price brackets, because most 19-year-olds, for example, are not earning a full adult wage. Now this behind me, this will stage games in the next World Cup, but it wasn't built for football, for soccer. The pitch is too small, so they will lose some capacity when they do that. But I did see some things here. The toilets are just fantastic. There's escalators. You want to spend time inside the stadium before the event, whereas at a lot of current English grounds, you don't want to do that. They're not really desirable places. And you can come in here, you can have something to eat. It's all expensive, but I think the model has to be different. There's lots of suites, there's lots of executive areas. I think any new Old Trafford has got to take into account the culture of Manchester United. There should be safe standing areas. There should be areas where, for example, the Red Army section can go. I know there's going to be executive areas. I know that executive fans pay a disproportionate amount for tickets towards Manchester United's revenue. And as a kid, I used to say, no, we don't want execs. And then as I got older, people are like, well, I've got an exec seat. I'm a Manchester lad. I've been going for years. I've done all right in business. I can afford an exec seat. Okay, I totally take that point as well. But there's got to be consultation, proper consultation with United fans. And there's been some so far. But don't just plough through the views of the fans who are going to use the stadium, and the fans who ultimately are going to pay for the stadium. This is wonderful, and not just because of the blue skies 350 days a year in Los Angeles or whatever it is. It is a truly spectacular stadium. It is state of the art. If we were going back 15 years, I could have been stood outside the new Allianz Arena in Munich saying similar. This has moved on another level. If there's going to be a new Old Trafford, as opposed to redevelopment, it's going to take a lot of inspiration from something like the SoFi in Los Angeles. There's lots of good from this stadium, from the architecture, from the facilities, from the public transport that is moving into this area. It's redeveloping the whole area, but proceed with caution. Manchester is not California. The economies are very, very different. Old Trafford needs to be bigger than what it is. There is a demand there from it. Overall, I'm optimistic about the way that Sir Jim Ratcliffe seems to be really keen on developing or rebuilding Old Trafford. Don't mind them looking at places like this, but respect the people who ultimately are going to pay for it.